Welcome to Forums That Matter, community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm Ed Covington, and I'm the coordinator of today's discussion, which has both remote and in-person audiences. Our topic today is anti-Semitism. What gave it birth? What sustains it? And what can we do to mitigate it? The speaker will present until 9:30, then we'll have Q&A until about 10. Please hold your questions until then, when a microphone will be provided for the in-person audience. The home audience can click the Q&A button and send questions in that way. Closed captions are enabled, and the Zoom participants can turn them off and on with the button at the bottom of their screen. Please silence your phones. The program is recorded and will be available in a few days. Is that you? Okay, maybe when I turn the light off, but it's done. And otherwise I'll turn it down. It will be available at ucc.org. So, keep it crystal together. You're number 6, I think. Yes. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Roger Klein of Congregation Mishkan, which is a new synagogue formed in the last year by Temple-Tifereth Israel and Anshe Chesed Fairmount. He's kindly come to share his time and expertise with us. He received his BA from Dartmouth and his MA and PhD from the University of Chicago, where fun goes to die, right? That's what the sweatshirts are saying at the kids here. He was ordained by the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where he also received a Master of Hebrew Letters. He additionally studied at the University of Tübingen in Germany and the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem. Most importantly, he's a graduate of Shaker Heights High. Rabbi Klein has served congregations in Indiana and Columbus, Ohio, as part of the University of Kentucky, Wesleyan in Connecticut, and at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Jerusalem. He's lectured widely at synagogues, churches, and universities around the country. Dedicated to lifelong learning, Rabbi Klein plays a pivotal role in Mishkan Or's adult learning program and conducts a Torah study class every Shabbat. Rabbi Klein, thank you for being with us.
Good morning, everybody. So nice to see you. You know what it means when a clergy person takes off his watch? Nothing. But I also see the clock there staring at me. Thanks to Ed for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it very, very much. And I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. There's a lot to talk about. I have about a half an hour to do it. So I may be rushing a little bit, and the things I may not be able to cover, perhaps we'll talk about in the Q&A. So in the moments given to me this morning, I want to talk about 5 topics. A brief survey of the types of anti-Semitism that have existed over the centuries. Secondly, an attempt to define anti-Semitism. Thirdly, what accounts for its durability. Fourth, a brief note on whether critiques of Israel are anti-Semitic. And lastly, what, if anything, can we do about anti-Semitism? So a 3-hour talk is going to try to be compressed into 30 minutes. Okay. First of all, a brief survey of types of anti-Semitism. The first is religious anti-Semitism. And I'm going to quote from the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I'm innocent of this man's blood. See it yourselves." And all the people, Jews, answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." The claim that the Jews crucified Jesus because he tried to expel the money changers from the temple created a sense that Jesus was threatening the Jewish power and financial well-being. So we see already some of the seeds of anti-Semitism. For St. Paul, Jesus' teaching replaced Judaism, though the Jews rejected that teaching just as they rejected Jesus, for they are blind to the truth. So, for example, from the Epistle to the Galatians, a man is justified by faith and not by the works of the law. And neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything. And out of this milieu comes the notion that the Jews are not just an enemy, but the ultimate enemy. And we have the legend of the wandering Jew. Ahasuerus is the name given to the wandering Jew, who, according to the legend, is doomed to wander eternally without rest until the millennium as punishment for taunting Jesus on the way to the crucifixion. The legend first occurred or appeared in a pamphlet in Germany in 1602 and was quickly spread in a variety of forms. And it received numerous applications in literary texts. Secondly, the Jew as an everlasting alien. The philosopher Herder, in spite of his outspoken humanism, he expressed the opinion that the Jewish people is and remains in Europe an Asiatic people, alien to our part of the world, bound to that old law which it received in a distant climate, and which, according to its own confession, it cannot do away with. Or the proto-anti-Semitic Houston Stewart Chamberlain, whom the Nazis thought of as an important foundation layer, and who happened also to have married one of Richard Wagner's daughters. Chamberlain said, but this alien people is indissolubly bound to an alien law that is hostile to all other peoples. And economic anti-Semitism. But it cannot be denied, and this was written by a very famous German historian, Heinrich von Treitschke, in the 19th century. But it cannot be denied that the Jews have contributed their part to the promotion of business with its dishonesty and its bold greed, and that they share heavily in the guilt for the contemptible materialism of our age, which regards every kind of work only as business and threatens to suffocate the old, simple pride and joy that the German felt in his work. In many thousands of German villages, we have the Jewish usurer, or as he goes on to say, capital as opposed to property is defined as wealth illicitly gained through speculation. Property is a Christian value. Capital is Jewish. Or political anti-Semitism. Treitschke held that the core of the problem was Jewry's contradictory desire to preserve its national identity while simultaneously claiming the right to participate fully in the national life of Germany. It wants to be part of the whole, but it also wants to hold on to its own specific way of living. And so Treitschke urged the Jews to rid themselves of their frivolous arrogance and to pursue a genuine and rapid assimilation into German culture and society. And finally, racial anti-Semitism by a journalist, Edward Adolphe Drumont, leader of the anti-Semitic movement in France, who wrote about what he called the racial differences between Aryans, whom he described as an idealist, chivalrous Christian people, and the Jews, who lack a creative impulse, who are ugly, with a hooked nose, contorted fingers, an unpleasant body odor, who are, and this is the key phrase, by nature. If you're facing religious anti-Semitism, a cure might be conversion to the primary religion. If it's racial, then there is no way out of it. Who are by nature spies, traitors, criminals, and carriers of disease. Through their cunning, the Jewish race has all but subjected the benign but careless Aryans of France. A quick survey of the kinds of anti-Semitism that we have inherited from history. What then is anti-Semitism? The short answer is a conspiracy theory. And here I quote Bret Stephens of the New York Times. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory that holds that Jews are uniquely prone to use devious means to achieve malevolent ends, and must therefore be opposed by any means necessary, including violence. Stephens goes on to say that anti-Semitism is what he called a shape-shifting virus. Shape-shifting virus that has adapted itself to the reigning prejudices of different ages. Conspiracy theory, which requires malevolent response, which adapts to the isms of the day. In other words, the Jews are seen as abnormal, other than us, scary, obdurate, who take on an almost, in this vision, mythic character. Something that has attained mythic character cannot be refuted by data or the facts. That's a definition of anti-Semitism. Why then is anti-Semitism so durable? I offer two fundamental reasons. One, like all conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism is based on real emotions, fear and anxiety and anger, that have no real and ready-to-hand rational explanations. The fear of the other, the fear of being overwhelmed, animated by emotion, which circumvents, therefore, any attempt to explain rationally the origin of the problem. That is, anti-Semitism, like all conspiracy theories, is irrational and powerful, a heady brew of factors. And here I want to quote Deborah Lipstadt in her recent book on anti-Semitism. And she says, it is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, that is essentially delusional and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is one. Think about it, he goes on to say. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage somewhere in the American West? Despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary, they believe this because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies to fool the public. Governmental chicanery is the prism through which they view the world, the prism, the assumption set through which the world is seen. However irrational their ideas may seem to us, they make sense to them. Conspiracy theories give events that may seem inexplicable to some people an intentional explanation. If we were to provide these conspiracy theorists with evidence that proves that the landing was indeed on the moon, they will dismiss out of hand what we are saying and assume, therefore, that we are part of the conspiracy. Trying to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents, with a rational explanation is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorist's preferred social, political, or ethical narrative is by definition false. Let me read that sentence again. Any information that does not correspond to the conspiracy theorist's preferred social, political, or ethnic narrative is by definition false, a priori, before the evidence is even tested. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing, S-E-A-L, self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge. Conspiracy theories reduce complex issues to the simplest denominator and infuse them with heated exaggerations, suspicions, and fantasies that have no connection to fact. For example, when the bubonic plague raged across Europe in the 14th century, Jews were accused of poisoning the well and spreading the disease. For people schooled in the millennial-long church-based anti-Semitism, this provided an easy, straightforward, and logical, the logic of their presuppositions, logical explanation for a seemingly inexplicable disease. In other words, a real explanation was not ready to hand, and therefore a vacuum of understanding, creating anxiety and despair arose, which necessitated reversion to a favorite theory based on Christian anti-Semitism. I'm not suggesting, nor is Lipset, that all Christians are anti-Semitic. But we certainly do know that there is a stream of anti-Semitism. I just quoted St. Paul in the Gospels that led to a virulent form of anti-Semitism. For people, I'm going to repeat this again, schooled in the millennia of church-based anti-Semitism, that the Jews are the conspirators, provided an easy, straightforward, and logical explanation for a seemingly inexplicable disease. She goes on to now say, economic downturns, political tensions, unsuccessful military actions, and a myriad of other crises were explained away. That's the key word. Explained away by attributing them to interference by the Jews. That's the end of that long quote from her book. And once the Jews are seen as conspirators, in the domains that I've described, the domains of religion, politics, economics, etc., they then become convenient suspects for the next set of fears and anxieties. The powerful traditions offer a foundation easily turned to explain simply what can only be explained, if at all, with complexity and nuance. And as a political philosopher, British philosopher, John Gray, and this is one of my favorite quotes, as horrible as it really is through implication. John Gray summarizes the matter in the following way. You can't argue with an irrational conspiracy theory through reasoning. The human mind, Gray goes on to say, the human brain is programmed for survival, not for truth. I want to read that again. You can't argue with an irrational conspiracy theory through reasoning. The human brain is programmed for survival, not for truth. So much for the durability of anti-Semitism. And you can see its sources, its foundations. Is criticism of Israel anti-Semitic? Criticism of Israel, when grounded in evidence and in reasoning, is, as far as I'm concerned, fine, acceptable. For example, one can claim that Prime Minister Netanyahu has used excessive force in Gaza. You can say this without being anti-Semitic. One can be critical of Netanyahu's government's attempt to weaken the Supreme Court without being anti-Semitic. But when one criticizes Israel for a certain activity while remaining silent when other countries engage in that activity, that is anti-Semitism. Very famous philosopher, British philosopher, some of you know who this is, Isaiah Berlin, who wrote wondrous essays, especially the short book, The Hedgehog and the Fox. He arranges intellectuals, literary people down through history as either hedgehogs or foxes. The hedgehog knows one big thing. The fox knows many small things. Plato is a hedgehog. Aristotle is a fox. Tolstoy is a hedgehog. Dostoevsky is a fox. Berlin once defined anti-Semitism, and this is profound but provocative, as hating Jews more than is necessary. Of course, that can seem to lead to anti-Semitism. But his point is that if a Jewish person engages in fraud, then it's fair to dislike that Jewish person. But if you say he's just being a Jew, then that is hating that person more than is necessary to deal with the situation. So to add, because of some stereotypical people is the cause, there you are involved in anti-Semitism. For example, in terms of criticizing Israel while not criticizing other nations or peoples for the same kind of activity, the United Nations has devoted many reports about Israel human rights violations, created many reports about Israel's human rights violations, while turning a blind eye to similar violations conducted by Hamas, other Palestinian entities, Iran, China, Russia. That's anti-Semitism. Finally, what can we do about anti-Semitism? Here's my answer. I don't know. But I'm going to try to say something about it. Anti-Semitism is a pathology, I've tried to make that clear, that reflects the vulnerability of two groups, the anti-Semites and the Jews. The anti-Semites construct conspiracy theories to account for their problems and their anxieties, their vulnerabilities, which are real. The Jews become victims of often vicious attacks, verbal, physical, of these theories. Two vulnerable groups. Any hope for curing this pathology and its two victim groups lies in getting to the roots of the problem. What accounts for the real fears, the real anxieties, the real sense of despair, of vulnerability? They are things like poverty, real vulnerability, a real sense that society is not dealing with their interests. These are groups that are legitimately suffering a sense of alienation. Conspiracy theories thrive on something real, a sense of anger, a sense of frustration, a sense of alienation. The solution is to take seriously those issues that confront people in their real lives, dealing with substandard education for their children, dealing with poverty, poor access to quality health care, a sense that society does not care for them. That is a way of trying to neutralize, to diminish the pathology of irrationalism, which cannot be dealt with circuitously, but have to be dealt with the roots of the problem. That's a way of dealing with the anti-Semites. What can protect the Jews from anti-Semitism? A flourishing democracy, which features rights that are taken seriously and a kind of pluralism that promotes a vision of a society that is enriched by many vital religions and ways of life, many contributing groups. The answer is democracy, pluralism, rights that are not only on the books, but enacted in real life, so that those afflicted as victims of prejudice can find protections in the order of a just and just-seeking society. So, what are the chances? What are the chances that these things will happen in modern day America? If they are slim, then the pathologies of anti-Semitism, animated by the darkest urges of human nature. Nietzsche says somewhere that human beings are an Abgrund, an abyss. Or he goes on to say as well, we go to Nietzsche for the truth, part of the truth. The earth has a skin, I'm quoting Nietzsche. The earth has a skin. The skin has a disease. The disease is human nature. So what are the chances of being able to ameliorate this condition? I think I've indicated what it might look like, but what are the chances? So if they are slim, then the pathologies like anti-Semitism and the darkest urges of human nature will continue to flourish. That, in essence, is my kind of overview of anti-Semitism, its sources, its nature, its potential intractability, but nevertheless, try to pose ways out of the millennial-long dilemma, and am to some degree skeptical that we're really going to try to do the things necessary.
Thank you very much. I feel enlightened. Okay, that was wonderful. Very interesting. We'll now go to our Q&A. Virtual attendees can participate by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of their screen. Real life attendees, we have microphones, so raise your hand and a microphone will be brought. And pad is being passed around. If you'd like to be on our mailing list to be reminded of forums, put your contact information on the clipboard, please, and you'll get email.
In 1240, the
Right.
Church of Paris brought charges against the Jewish community for two key platforms. One, that they didn't know their history, that because it was oral, it had no value. And two, because they didn't know their language of Hebrew, because particularly the interpretation of young woman was interpreted by the Christians as being a virgin. Robert Chapin wrote that, compiled that history. What has changed?
I think the answer is nothing. Of course, is it fatuous and irrelevant to say that both of those claims are false and misleading? The Jewish tradition is not just an oral tradition. As a matter of fact, those of you know about the Jewish literary tradition, the oral law, which the rabbis claim was also given on Mount Sinai along with the written Torah. If there is no oral Torah, let's take Torah in its broadest sense of wisdom. If there is no oral wisdom, then history makes us increasingly remote from our foundational text. And if they're to remain alive, an interpretive tradition needs to emerge. And that oral tradition written down is the work of rabbis and non-clergy to try to do two things: render interpretations that are faithful to the text, but that also deal with the problems and challenges of the time. The oral tradition, therefore, is also written down, but it is still alive. I conduct a Torah study session every Shabbat morning, Saturday morning, and we are engaged in extending the oral tradition of the Jewish people because we are facing issues that have been unprecedented in human history. And therefore, if our texts are going to continue to be relevant, we have to ask them to face contemporary, unprecedented conditions. The second thing is about Hebrew. Yes, the Septuagint translated Betula, I think it's Betula, as virgin. And that's an incorrect translation. In Isaiah, what is it, chapter 6, chapter 12, chapter, 9? In some chapter, talks about a young woman who will conceive the future king of Israel, Hezekiah. Hezekiah is one of the 4 or 5 good kings among the 45 described in the Torah. This has nothing to do with virginity per se, and the translators of the Torah into Greek did a disservice by pointing it out as a virgin. These questions will never go away until people are living lives of satisfaction where they don't have to conspire against the scary other who is depriving them of the life they want to lead. Robert Chesed, I know very well, the wonderful historian.
Rabbi Klein, thank you for the presentation. The audience may not know that Rabbi Klein is Rabbi Klein is a baseball. And I wanted you to know, Rabbi Klein, that I have written to President Trump and asked him to issue a good executive order this time and make the day that pitchers and catchers report be a national holiday. However,
Wait, there can't be a however. Let's pause on this. And by the way, it's a wonderful crowd. How do I know when I'm facing a wonderful crowd? When baseball is mentioned, to applause.
I just wanted to quote Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, who said, I believe this is correct, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, period. What would your thoughts be on that fairly definite statement?
Well, we'd have to ask what anti-Zionism is. I assume that what it's taken to be often is the non-validity of the Jewish state, and that Jews were colonizers and entering a land which is inimical to its own culture and morals. In fact, it's the result of World War I that we have the current situation where the Allies, Britain and France especially, divided up that territory. And the boundaries have been changed frequently throughout history. Why is it that the Jewish people does not have a right, given especially its history of persecution, to live in peace in its own land? Notwithstanding also that the history of borders is in a sense the history of conquest. So why is a particular, look, one can do 2 things at the same time. One can worry about conquest as a form of legitimation without demonizing just one people. I think this is an example of hating Jews more than is necessary, because the claims of the anti-Zionist theoreticians tend to single out Jews for special opprobrium, when in fact the issue is larger than that. But I think I do want to say something else about this. Do we have an intractable situation in the Middle East? Certainly true that the fact that Jews reside in a land surrounded by Arab religion and culture does present an irritant. And that irritant, I would not blame on the Zionists, but I think that it's a special responsibility for the Zionists, both in Israel and in the diaspora, to try to work for a resolution of this problem. And in my view, the current government in Israel is deliberately putting up roadblocks to that solution. We all know that Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Arab countries are ready to make a real peace with Israel. Of course, the nationalists and the religious right in Israel are opposed to it. For the religious right, God gave the land to the Jews. How do we know this? God said so. The nationalists don't want continued restriction of the boundaries, the borders of the state of Israel. Before the Churchill Memorandum in 1922, the mandate gave the Jews the West Bank and the East Bank. And the Churchill Memorandum cut off the East Bank, Jordan. And since the Six-Day War, it's been restricted even more. So I don't think that the solution to this problem depends exclusively or only on the Jews, but I think the Jews in Israel and diaspora have a real responsibility given the facts on the ground.
Hi, good morning, Rabbi. I actually belong to Fairmount Temple at one time, a temple hospital. I was told online that nothing was going to be talked about between Israel and Palestine today. The reason why the last time this was supposed to happen was canceled was because a counteractive person to talk about the real side or the opposite side of the story was going to be here as well. And the person from the Federation decided that he wouldn't talk anymore with us. So that's why it was canceled. But I guess what I want to pose to you is, or to tell everybody, not even pose to you, is that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And they should never, ever be conflated. So anti-Zionism is a nationalistic, it is a political ideology. And it's been around since the late 1800s.
Are you giving a lecture? Why don't you ask the question?
I'm about to.
Would you hold the mic closer to your mouth?
Oh, sure. Oh, I apologize. So as far as, I guess I'm trying to create a question here, sir. So what do you say when, I guess, people say that anti-Semitism is being against Israel, especially when you were saying that we don't hold other countries accountable for what people are saying that Israel is doing, and that's false. We talk about what's going on in Africa and what's going on in the Congo and all those other things. Why are we pointing out Hamas? Hamas is an oppressed people that, according to international law, can actually defend themselves against an oppressor, which is Israel. So, as far as the apartheid that's going on in the West Bank and in Gaza, where actually in the West Bank, there are two roads, one for Jews and one for Palestinians. They're not allowed.
You're still not getting to a question.
So I am about to. So my question is to you, what do you say to that as far as what you think is going on there, because it is apartheid?
Look, like every complex issue, and there's no more complex issue than the Middle East, nuance is an important component of dealing with the situation. So just to make strong statements that have partial truth to them, obfuscates and puts a roadblock up against any attempt to deal with deeply human questions, which are complex, which face obstacles, about which there's disagreement. Any attempt merely to generalize is going to just perpetuate the problem and not allow us to sit back and say to our opponents or those with whom we're negotiating, here's the first thing that needs to be said. You have a point. And its durability, the fact that it's repeated over and over again, has to be taken seriously as containing some of the truth. So merely to demonize, to generalize, is precisely putting up a roadblock, which I take it you would like not to have erected. So my answer to you is partial truths. There are other truths as well that are different. Let's sit down and try with goodwill and the desire to create some felicitous arrangement for all of us. Because the Middle East, with its natural resources and human resources, can be one of the 2 or 3 major economic centers in the world. And it's being held up by ideology and by resistance. So I think it's a tragic situation made the more tragic by generalizations and accusations.
Thank you. It's not working. Hello? Is it working? Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. I had a comment and a question. You mentioned democracy as being an essential part of trying to resolve the giant issue we all face. I would submit that part of our faith being love for all people is another hedgehog issue.
Another what issue?
A hedgehog
Hedgehog.
issue, to use your terminology.
Of course.
And I'm wondering if you would agree that everything you've talked about to some extent applies to all the discrimination in our world, from immigrants, women, transgender people, and Muslims, so many more, that it's the fear that people feel in all these situations.
Yeah. My mic, I think, is not on. Shall I put it on or can you hear me? I should put it on. I have it. Well, it's a big question. So let's take the famous biblical phrase from Leviticus chapter 19. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what does love mean? Well, conventionally, love is an emotion. It's the pitter-patter of the heart. Is that what the biblical author is getting at? A group of Jewish scholars over the years have said love, it's not fundamentally an emotion. Love animates action. It's not that I should love my neighbor. I've had many neighbors in my lifetime. They're not, this may come as a surprise to you, they're not all lovable. But what I can do is I can respect their dignity. I can respect their need to have certain things that I want for myself. And by the way, love your neighbor as yourself presupposes loving yourself before you can love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Self-respect is a condition for being able to respect others. How easy is that? Well, it's a challenge. This is one of the reasons what's the impediment? I'll tell you what the impediment is. Human nature, right? E. Cummings says, we're the whole ball of wax to ourselves. Or I've never seen a peripherally situated ego. We're all egocentric. So given the harsh realities of human nature and its possibilities, what's the antidote? Institutions and law. If we were angels, I think, who says this? I don't remember. If we were angels, we wouldn't need law. We need law because we're not angels. And so it's always a conflict, a dilemma, a tension between the impulses of human nature and our desire to transcend the rawer ones. And I agree with you, but we can't wait until we've overcome the dark urges of human nature to find ways to get along. And therefore, I think we need institutions and public norms in order to help us to do what we might want to do, but are having trouble doing.
Rabbi, thank you. So in your travels, when you meet a stranger, maybe a colleague, a friend, and an anti-Semitic sentiment is brought to your attention, how do you respond? And by extension, how do we as a community respond?
So I feel fortunate that I have not really experienced personally much anti-Semitism in my life. I went to a college where up until the few years before I went there were quotas on Jews and that Jews were really looked down upon. We just had Maya Wiley come to the temple to speak, and she also went to Dartmouth and said from the very first day, she felt an oppressive prejudice against African Americans. So systemic anti-Semitism and racism, of course, is a part of the fabric of our culture. I do remember one serious anti-Semitic comment from a friend of mine with whom I played tennis regularly. He used the words, "Jew him down." I was taken aback by that comment and just didn't have the words to respond. And the reason I remember it is that in a way I'm ashamed of myself for not being able to say something to him. Were it to happen again, I would, I hope, speak forcefully, but also in an attempt to sustain the relationship through some sense of we human beings have flaws and foibles. This is one of them. It offends me. But it doesn't mean that I'm flawless and that you and I can continue to have a relationship and talk about this. I would hope.
Thank you, Rabbi Klein. So much. What you said is completely what I feel also. I appreciate it. I have a question about Israel moving forward and always. Can it move forward as a democracy, which I believe it should, and also be a Jewish state?
Right. That's a key question. I frankly don't know if that can finally happen. I think that is a dual ideal. One way to think about it is the rights of citizenship, which are given to all the inhabitants of the land, and the protection of those rights, while also trying to maintain some notion of Jewish peoplehood. Whether in the long run, it's going to be able to be managed as a twofold approach, I don't know. But it strikes me that there are national cultures. I don't know if one would criticize France for its predominantly Catholic culture. I'm not sure it's as Catholic as it used to be, but some nations have also ethnic cultures. So I think you posed a question. Look, one of the one of the possible problems with a solution to the Middle East issue is the assimilation of Israel into Middle Eastern culture. As long as it's in crisis, it maintains the Jewish community's deep interest in Israel. I worry that once it becomes more Levantine, more Eastern, that it will seem less similar to American Jews than it does at this point. So that there is a danger in a way, if one values both democracy and the Jewish nature of the state, to recognize one of the possible implications of peace breaking out in that area. So you pose a problem for which I have no reasonable speculation.
Thank you so much. One more? One? Okay. Time's up, I go.
Thanks. The solutions that you propose all seem to fall under the umbrella of Olam, repairing the world, which as Jews in American society, we have immersed ourselves in philanthropic endeavors to, for instance, supporting hospitals and civil rights organizations. And I'm wondering, during this time, you mentioned the field with conspiracy theories, that these very acts of tikkun olam are being weaponized and used against the Jewish community in the conspiracy circle.
What's an example of that, Amy?
Seeing the names of Jews on buildings as you drive by, you see, there is that effort to infiltrate in this era of disinformation. Is there a way to continue to pursue allyship and philanthropy as Jews, because this is what we're called upon to do, without having also weaponized?
Well, stereotypes fall with great difficulty. And if they nourish the passions of those who are critical, it's very hard to rid society of those sorts of things. I don't know what the answer to that is, other than lifting all boats. If we deal with impoverishment, if we deal with the privations of so many people, groups in our society, then the need to be conspiratorial or critical of the other becomes, I think, less important as people begin to feel satisfactions in the lives that they are leading with the sense that their society supports them. So I just revert to my panacea, very small p, that the aggressiveness, hatred are
Minister Reverend Will Humphrey from East Shore Unitarian Church. To see what else is happening in our congregation, check out our website at uucleveland.org. Thanks again for joining us and have a great week. Thank you so much.